Hi, I'm gonna try to knock my way through this one last one. Today is my first day back. I put out two programs today. I feel pretty good. As you know, if you follow me, I had a flu. The damn thing is, I got the flu shot on Monday and Tuesday I got sick. But anyway, it's lasted for about 2 weeks. I just can't sit in front of the TV anymore and laying there. Ugh. So it felt good to be back. I feel a lot better. Anyway. Let's talk about this guy, Frank Erickson. He isn't really well known today at all, but in his day, the last half of the 20th century, he was very well known. He was probably I'm going to say the biggest bookmaker, well, certainly the biggest in New York, probably the biggest in the country, independent bookmaker, not with a casino or a firm. His parents, let me first say this about Erickson. You know, what you have to know is that gambling was really frowned, but today people are a little bit more open-minded about things. Going to Las Vegas isn't considered risque, but at the time it was, and gambling was looked on as it was frowned upon. The churches were down on it. In fairness, it's not a victimless thing. A lot of people get addicted to gambling. That's unfortunate, and they get hurt. And then other folks go, you can't win. You lose money. I mean, you're not going to win. The house is going to win. And lastly, there's a lot, billions of dollars in gambling. Not, so the government really doesn't give a damn about your soul, but they're more concerned with losing their tax dollars. So they went after somebody like Erickson. He was getting battered on two sides, from the church and from the government. They really wanted a piece of this guy. They wanted to put him out of business. In some ways, though, he was kind of a noble soul. His parents died when he was just a boy. He was popped into an orphanage. By the way, he met his wife, the only woman he was ever married to, Amelia Wingerten, in the orphanage. She was an orphan there as well. They married, they had two kids, and they had grandchildren. Uh, in his late teens, he went to work in Coney Island as a busboy in a restaurant. And some customer there, the story is, he handed him a $5 bill, said, look, go across the bar over there, place a bet on a race that's about to happen, racetrack. He did, but he got there too late. The race had already run, and the guy's horse lost, so he put the $5 in his pocket and thought, well, I'm ahead $5. He told the guy, hey, your horse lost. What are you going to do? So he liked that. He liked winning. And he eventually moved to Brooklyn, where in 1922, his business grew. He had a staff of 5 clerks to help him keep track of his bookmaking operation. And then he moved to Manhattan, and it got a little bit bigger. He had a staff of 12. By 1929, he had a payroll of a couple of dozen people, and he was running a pretty big wire room in over in Jersey, where it was safer. Jersey was a little less stiff on the gambling thing than New York was. So by the 1930s, he's one of the biggest bookies in New York, and he lives like a lord in this Tony Forest Hills, and he's in a medieval style castle. He paid 75,000 for it. That would be about $1.5 million today, which doesn't sound like much in our real estate prices, but bear this in mind. In the mid 1930s, you could buy a new, very large house for about $6,000. This guy's living in a $775,000 house. So in 1935, this is how much money he had. He bought the Tropical Park racetrack in Florida for $250,000 cash. He controlled it through his son, who sold it in 1941. In 1938, he bought into the Havana American Racing Association, and through that, he got control of the Oriental Park Racetrack and Casino in Havana with Meyer Lansky. Now, Erickson was respected by Arnold Rothstein, the so-called brain, the guy who kind of more or less invented crime in America, invented organized crime in America. A lot of people graduated from working with Rothstein, including Lucky Luciano, Costello. Anyway, he palled around with Dutch Schultz. Lucky Luciano was a pal. Joe Adonis in Brooklyn was a friend of his. But aside from gambling, Erickson didn't color outside the lines. He stayed within the law, led a fairly quiet life. Frank Costello, he was like Frank Costello in a lot of ways, sort of laid back. And Costello was a good friend of his. They were close friends. In fact, when Erickson died, Costello came out of retirement, a rare thing, and made a public appearance at his funeral. So he and Costello came up with this system. They were sort of laying off bets, which means buying bets. I'll explain more later from other bookies to even the odds and to minimize the losses everybody's going to get. So they also set up a layoff and odds system that is still used today by bookmakers. They would specialize in high dollar layoff bets, these types of bets. They occur like when a low level bookmaker usually has a large number of bets on a set of odds, right? So, for instance, a bookmaker or a bookie receives a majority of his bets on a sports team to win a certain point spread. All right, they have to win by so much. The small time bookies, they lay off some of that activity, some of that bets onto Erickson's gambling book, which it was backed up with a lot of money because a series of wrong bets could drive a bookie out of business. So at that point, Erickson was probably the biggest bookmaker in New York, and he's accepting bets from 48 states, he said, including every racetrack in the country. He employed over 3,000 people across the U.S. to run his operations. He did it all through an office in New Jersey, again, to sidestep the gambling laws in New York. But he ran it in Jersey, but all the business came from Manhattan. So reform mayor, I'm going to include Aurelio LaGuardia, he was a good man, and LaGuardia hated Erickson. He called him a tin horn punk. He threatened to have him deported, which is pretty funny because Erickson was born and raised in New Jersey, so but technically he couldn't do it. That didn't stop him from threatening that. So in 1939, LaGuardia told his police, his prosecutors, I want this guy in jail. Go harass him. Don't kill him, but go harass him. And we're going to turn the other way if something bad happens. And so they took off after Erickson, with the religious zeal. There were lengthy investigations, one after another, about his gambling operations, about him. In 1939, they arrested him on a charge of vagrancy. So what they had done is the prosecutors, they dusted off this old law, Section 899 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, which states any person who has no visible means of support or any person who maintains himself for the most part by gaming, is a disorderly gambling is a disorderly person. So disorderly equals, in the eyes of the law, vagrant, right? It's one of the measurements of vagrant. So it was a misdemeanor charge, but that wasn't the point. The point was to humiliate Erickson and to just rattle his cage, annoy him. So, and it did. So on June 12, 1939, Erickson had his lawyer, this guy Martin Littlejohn, a big-time lawyer. He was a former Nassau County District Attorney. He walks into court, Littlejohn, with piles of paper, and he tosses them onto the judge's desk, and he says, look, this represents $125,000. That was a lot of money at the time, 1939, worth of stock in three of the city's largest banks. And then he asks, is a man with this kind of stock a vagrant? I don't think so. Well, and then he went on to argue, he should have just quit while he was ahead, but he went on to argue that Erickson may have been a bookie on the side, but he was primarily an investor in stocks, and he was a bond trader. He was a Wall Street tycoon, if you listen to this guy. Not some back alley bookie, as he was trying to be portrayed. Littleton then produced a trading ledger. He showed a long history of trades on Erickson's accounts. So the assistant DA, this guy Erwin Shapiro, he objected. He said, you can't do what, you can't enter this in the court. However, the judge was a known LaGuardia supporter, and he just blew the whole argument off. He refused to dismiss the case, and he found Erickson guilty. Erickson had to post a $10,000 bond, which is sort of silly since he was a vagrant, remember? And was ordered to stop bookmaking, which is even dumber. The misdemeanor conviction was overturned by a court of appeals. But the point was made. It cost Erickson thousands of dollars for a misdemeanor. But as his lawyer advised him, this is where it starts. So they get you on this misdemeanor, and they build it into another misdemeanor, they build it into a felony, and next thing you know, you're sitting in prison. That was the plan, the city's plan. So he had to pay thousands of dollars to defend himself on this silly charge. And then bear in mind, this is a busy guy, and he has to spend probably, 40 hours sitting in a hallway of a courtroom. That'll drive you nuts. So LaGuardia is still not happy. He wants this guy in jail. He told the papers that Erickson is a bum and we don't want him around here. So he was going to have to do something more substantial than be a bum and a liar if he's going to go to, if LaGuardia wanted him to go to jail. Well, in April of 1941, Erickson, the event that is going to happen wasn't the point, it was what happened after that. Erickson, he was a member of the exclusive New York City Athletic Club. I don't know if it's exclusive anymore. It was when I was a kid. And he had an apartment there. And three gunmen went up there, somehow got in. They were waiting outside the hall. Erickson was inside the suite that he had there with a group of other guys having a meeting. The word on the street was that Erickson stashed $100,000 in cash in the apartment for emergencies. So the men put on their masks, they take out their guns, they're about to kick in the door. When a chambermaid goes by, she sees three guys with masks and guns, so she does what anybody else does. She screams and continues to scream till one of the guys hauled off and punched her in the mouth, knocked her down, the poor woman down. And the guys fled. And people in the meeting came running out. One of them was a police captain. He gave chase. One of the guys was trapped. And for some reason shot himself rather than be captured. I don't know what that was about. So the other two did get caught. They went to prison. Erickson was incredibly grateful to this woman. He gave her $1,000 reward. Now, bear in mind, she's making what? Less than $1 an hour? That's what the minimum wage was. So $1,000, pretty good. And he arranged for her to get $25 a month for the rest of her life. Again, a lot more than it sounds. It was like a nice little Social Security check sort of, for the rest of her life. Excuse me. So the district attorney's office is paying attention to this, and they heard this rumor that there was a police captain there. I mean, what's a police captain doing in Erickson's suite? And he ran after these guys and so forth. Then, when the DA's office started to investigate, that same captain killed himself. So they held hearings. Now, this is, you see, it was the after effect of it. They held hearings. Why was that police captain there? And Erickson said, I don't know what you're talking about. However, one of his guests was this guy, a Wall Street broker, Milton Untermeyer, who broke down and said, I'm not going to lie while I'm under oath. I don't go to jail. So, yeah, that police captain was there. Well, that just made the city more determined to jail Erickson. It was a big crackdown on him. Over the course of the next 15 years, the courts went after Erickson time and time again. He was jailed. Since 1919, he had been jailed 10 times, but most of those times were after this crackdown. So he decided he would put on a different front. He opened a real estate business on Park Avenue, which is a really expensive neighborhood place. I don't think you could open a real estate office there today. And in Manhattan, he opened a very successful, very large, very elegant flower shop on Madison Avenue. He looked legit. That didn't work. In 1952, the state of New Jersey convicted him on a gambling charge and jailed him for 14 months. Excuse me. Remember, I've got this cold, so bear with me. Erickson offhandedly mentioned to a reporter that he paid his brother Leonard a salary. This is a quote: a salary of $20,000 a year just to take my money to the bank. Shouldn't have done that. So in 1950, the district attorney Frank Hogan, he arrests Erickson's brother on a 30-count indictment, and it's clever what he did. He got him for accepting a fortune in bets from heavy bettors across state lines. It was a law that Hogan kind of sort of made up and cobbled together. His theory was that under a previous but little known legal ruling, and Erickson's lawyers didn't know about this, a bet solicited in New York, it said, even though it was actually placed in New Jersey, is still a violation of New York gambling laws. So it was a technicality, but it hurt. The police estimated that, I don't know how badly it hurt, that Erickson deposited more than 30 million in banks in one 12-year period. And that didn't include the secret bank accounts they didn't know about that they couldn't find. Sorry. Um, anyway, all this brought him before the Kefauver Committee, the last place Erickson wanted to be. He was combative. He was a little obnoxious. He just wasn't going to get battered around. He took the fifth, excuse me, to virtually every question, including, "Did you go to school beyond the fourth grade?" He said he wouldn't answer. It would incriminate him. In 1953, he was convicted, as is always going to happen. You, when you defy the law, they're going to get you one way or the other. They convicted him on tax evasion. They got him for 6 months. Well, it wasn't much. And they fined him a couple of $100,000 in back taxes. I'm sorry to be doing that. In 1959, Erickson was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury investigation on the heavyweight title fight between Ingmar Johansson and Floyd Patterson. I don't think that was a crooked fight from what I know about it. I had the pleasure, the privilege, the honor of shaking Floyd Patterson's hand once. And I read a lot about it. I really admire that guy. I don't think that fight was fixed at all. I just think they were looking for it. I don't think a lot of people like the fact that Johansson won either. This guy from Sweden is coming to this country, beating the living hell out of our best fighter. Anyway, Erickson just had enough, so he retired in 1960. He had bleeding ulcers. He had a bad heart, very bad heart. He sold his house, his big mansion. He moved into an apartment at the athletic club that we talked about before. In 1968, he's 72 years old. He went to the hospital for a stomach operation. I don't know which of these is right. He died. He either died before surgery or, the other way I understand, he died on the table. And this was all due to complications from his ulcers, and that led to that fatal heart attack. Yeah, interesting guy.
In a setting reminiscent of a Hollywood production, the Senate Crime Committee, headed by Senator Kefauver, Senators Toby and O'Connor, and Attorney Halley, becomes the sensation of the country. Frank Erickson, big-time bookmaker, summoned from jail where he's serving a 2-year sentence, is the first sensation maker. Senator Kefauver, hearing the lawbreaker, refused to answer the attorney's simple question.
Your business. We can't hear you, Mr. Erickson.
My business? I have no business. I'm in jail.
What was your business prior to being convicted?
I object on the ground.